Hey everybody, my name is Brendan Noble and I'm a young adult author. We're halfway through National Novel Writing Month and I'm 1 month away from the publication of my third book in the Prism Files series, Pridefall. And so, 1 month away from that release, I thought it would be a good time to discuss why I decided to do the type of publishing I did, self-publishing versus traditional publishing. So I wanted to talk about the 3 main reasons I decided to self-publish, as well as a few cons to that decision, so that those of you who are still trying to decide which route you want to take can have a kind of a clear view of that decision. Reason number 1 I decided to self-publish was independence and creative control. I spent a lot of time on my books, and one of the things I really wanted to be able to do is have independence and complete control over them. That's something that was extremely important to me, and in the traditional publishing industry, you often don't have. When you're an author, you put hundreds of hours into work on your book. You craft the story yourself, you want to make sure it's perfect, and you want to make sure that the story is the story that you want to tell. When you're a self-publisher, you have complete control over that. Sometimes when you're working with a traditional publisher, they will request changes or tweaks to your book to ensure it's more marketable. Now there's advantages to that, but it also means that you do not have complete creative control over your book, which to me was a major disadvantage. Now, traditional publishers do a lot of this for a reason, which is to ensure that your book sells, because it's within their interest for it to sell, and so they're going to try to help it get there. But that often means that your story has to be tweaked. And for a lot of us, we are really fixed to our story. And if we believe it's marketable, as a self-publisher, you can put it out there. But there are disadvantages to that, where if you think it's going to be successful, but you don't have the market research that a traditional publisher might have, your book might not sell as well as you expect. For me, personally, I value independence a lot. And when it comes to my books that I put my heart and soul into writing, I really wanted to have complete control over them. I wanted to be able to know that I'm going to be able to tell a story. Nobody's going to be able to change that story unless I approve it. And that is an extremely important process for me. And it's one of the major reasons why I chose self-publishing. Reason number 2 is publishing and schedule control. One big thing that you'll notice a difference with in self-publishing versus traditional publishing is self-publishing can happen a lot quicker. We still have the same access to a lot of the editors, cover designers, and interior designers that all the traditional publishers have access to, which is a really new thing. And doing a lot of those things, such as that cover design, the formatting work, and a lot of other things, take work and time. And that's why traditional publishers often have years to 2 years to 3 years to publish a book, but that can often really slow the start to a writer's career. As a self-publisher, if you're willing to take that time to be a professional and ensure you make your book right in that publication process, it's on your schedule. If you want to release the book in 6 months and you manage to do all the work in that time and make sure it's done correctly, you can do that. You can't do that as a traditional publisher, because with the traditional publisher, they set your release schedule and they have complete control over that. And not only do traditional publishers have complete control over the schedule, they have control over what your cover looks like, what the interior of your book looks like, as well as everything else. You don't have that ability to brand your book how you want to. Self-publishing has come a long way, where again, we have access to those cover designers and formatters and everything that the traditional publishers used to only have access to. But now, we can tell the designer what we want our cover to look like. We can work back and forth with the designer. But with the traditional publisher, they're the ones working with the designer, and they design your cover, whether you like it or not. Again, as I spent hundreds of hours writing these books, I wanted to make sure that the branding of the book, the cover, the formatting, the interior, was something I had control over, so that way I made the book look the way I wanted to make it. Sometimes that's a lot more difficult, and there is an advantage to traditional publishing where they can handle it for you if you don't have the business sense or the formatting experience. But it is also a thing to be able to have control and be able to brand and market your book how you want to. And that's a huge reason for me why I wanted to self-publish. I wanted to have my cover on my book and not let someone else determine what cover goes on my story. The last thing I'd like to talk about on publishing control is that I have the ability to price my books however I want. A traditional publisher will price their books however they want, and you get no say in that. But as a self-publisher, I can price my ebook much lower than most traditional publishers are willing to do, and therefore make it more attractive to potential buyers. I can price my paperback however I want. If I want to run a promo, I can. If my traditional publisher decides they don't want to have interest in promoting my book anymore, I can't decrease the price of that book to make sure it sells better. But as a self-publisher, I can decide to run deals, send it out to my email list, and push that out. But you can't be able to do that for a traditional publisher because you have no control over pricing, and that can really impact the amount of sales that you get. Number 3 is probably the one that you hear most often and is a really big deal, and that is royalties. So one of the biggest differences between self-publishing and traditional publishing is how you're paid. In traditional publishing, at first you receive an advance ahead of time. It could be anything from a couple $1,000s to $10,000 to $100,000, depending on how big of an author you are. But until you reach the number of sales to equal that advance, you receive nothing else in royalties. And beyond that, you receive only about 10% to 20% royalties, which is significantly less as you receive as a self-publisher. As a self-publisher, I don't receive any money in advance, but I do receive between 50 and 70% of royalties on every book I sell. And that makes a big difference. If you're planning to be able to sell a lot of books, you can potentially make a lot more money than you would as a traditional publishing. And that is something you have to balance. If you want that money up front, potentially a traditional publisher could work well for you. Self-publishing can be expensive up front, but could be much more lucrative in the long run. And obviously there is more that matters than just money, but when you're publishing and writing a book and wanting to make it potentially a career, what really matters is being able to know how much money you're going to make and how to budget for that. And self-publishers in the long run will make more money off royalties if they market their book well and their book sells well. Now, there are some cons to self-publishing that I'd like to address. The first of these cons is the negative perception that often comes of self-publishing. That's because a lot of self-publishers don't take the time to edit their books, put a professional cover on it, and ensure that there's quality writing inside of it. They just pump out books and they end up being low quality. There are plenty of fantastic self-published authors out there, but there are also a lot that don't focus on the quality. Traditional publishing has this built-in filter, so you know that there's been some type of editing done to it no matter what. Self-publishing can be more of a risk for a reader, and that's something that you have to be able to understand as a self-published author, that you have to climb that hurdle a little bit, especially on your debut novel. Second is bookstores and libraries. They're very difficult to get into these as a self-publisher. Self-publishers can go through things like Ingram Spark to reach out, make your book available to bookstores and libraries, but they might not necessarily take it because they focus on a lot of reviews and things that traditional publishers have access to and we don't. But if you become a well-selling author digitally, there's a good chance that your book can be made available in bookstores. So while it is a disadvantage, it's not something that's impossible to overcome. It just requires a lot more work. And third is the upfront cost. When you're working with a traditional publisher, you receive that advance and they pay for the editing, the cover, and everything else for your book. But as a self-publisher, you have to pay for these things, which can be expensive up front. But as we talked about with royalties, that can lead to a lot more growth in the long run. Even though there's more risk up front, you can potentially make more money if you know how to market and handle your business sense well. So that's all for me today. If you have any more questions about traditional publishing or self-publishing, go ahead and message me or send them down in the comments below. I'd love to see what questions you have. This can be a complicated process, and it's not a decision that everyone will be making the same way. So for some people, traditional publishing is the best route, and for others, self-publishing is the best route. And so I'm not going to recommend a route to you that isn't the best for you. And since Pridefall is coming out in a month, I'm going to push my own books a bit here. Both The Fractured Prism and Crimson Rains are available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, Apple Books, and pretty much anywhere you can buy books online and for paperback and ebook forms. So you can check those out in the links below. And as always, if you like this video, please like and subscribe down below. I'll be coming out with new videos every Friday to answer your questions about the publishing process, being a writer, and books in general. I hope everyone has another great week of NaNoWriMo. If you'd like to keep updated on my progress, go ahead and follow me on Twitter at Brendan_Noble. There's a link down in the description as I keep myself updated and trying to write as well as editing as much as possible this month. I'm falling a little bit behind, but hopefully I'll be able to catch up. See you guys.